Hello and welcome. I am Danielle, the marketing manager here at CollectiveSun. Thank you for joining our webinar on the Energy Community Bonus Adder, What You Need to Know. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our Director of Sales at CollectiveSun. Nicole Withrow brings with her over 2.5 decades of expertise in sales management, contract administration, and project fulfillment. But more than her impressive background, she's a true advocate for nonprofits and has helped over 200 organizations on their solar journey to this day. How you doing, Nicole?
I'm so good, Danielle, and thank you for that kind introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Withrow, as Danielle just stated, Director of Sales for CollectiveSun. Oops, there's a poll that just popped up in front of my screen. Before we get started with today's presentation, I do want to remind you that this webinar is for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal or tax advice. So in today's webinar, we are going to take a deep dive into the Energy Community Bonus Adder, talk about exciting news regarding the low-income communities bonus adder portal, and then explore new financing solutions from CollectiveSun before we get to the meat and potatoes, opening it up for Q&A. All right, so let's get started with who is CollectiveSun. So for anyone joining the webinar today who's not familiar with CollectiveSun, we are a solar finance company dedicated to serving nonprofit and tax-exempt organizations nationwide. We've been connecting nonprofits with capital for their solar projects since 2011. While the passing of the IRA brings change to the solar and solar finance industries, as well as more options for nonprofits going solar, our role really remains the same, and that's to help nonprofits navigate their solar journey and to connect them with financing solutions that fit the unique needs of their organizations. In just the past 6 years, we have partnered with over 200 nonprofit organizations nationwide on their solar financing. And not only are we very proud of that, but as you can imagine, it's made us very familiar with the challenges nonprofits face going solar, as well as the challenges of the solar installation process itself. Because of that familiarity, we have done our level best to make ourselves an easy button, if you will, for nonprofits on their solar journey. At this time, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Lee Barkin, resident policy guru here at CollectiveSun. Some of you may already be aware that breaking down bill text and policy into digestible terms is Lee's superpower. This superpower, I gotta say, has been honed over the past year as the IRA has provided lots of opportunity to do deep dives into direct pay and the new bonus adders created by the IRA. Qualifying for the various bonus adders allows for the layering of incentives that can help make projects more affordable. If saving 30% was exciting, then stacking additional savings opportunities on top of that can be a real game changer for many projects. Our goal today is the same as you've seen in these past webinars, and that is to continue to help arm folks with resources and engage the collective installer and nonprofit audience we gathered today in conversation as we all look to evaluate the opportunity to layer additional savings into nonprofit solar projects that qualify for the Energy Community Bonus Adder. Lee, without further ado, would you be so kind as to kick off today's conversation on the Energy Community Bonus Adder?
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole, for that great introduction, and Danielle for kicking us off. And yet again, another amazing set of slides that you put together for us here. So topic of today is the Energy Community Bonus Adder. All right. Energy Community Bonus Adder has been kind of the sleeping giant of all the bonus adders. And you've probably seen some of our other webinars, and we've kind of been on this tour of bonus adders, and there's low-income community and domestic content and energy community. And what's really amazing about Energy Community and what makes it different is its simplicity. No math today. if you've been through some of the other sessions, there's no math. It's simple. There's basically a map. We'll kind of talk you through it. And it doesn't have these limitations like the allocated bonus adders where there's a limited number of them. And so the simplicity translates into a higher kind of absorption rate in the finance world. You can rely upon it. You can count on it. You can build it into all of your financial models, and you can just have some certainty that it's actually going to come through. There's been a real challenge with some of the other bonus adders where, you're trying to make the numbers work and you go, well, we're going to get a 40% bonus adder. Well, I don't know. It depends if we get this allocation. I don't know. It depends if these other numbers work. that all kind of goes away on this one. This one, it's like, well, we're eligible, and we'll walk through today about the different ways you can become eligible. But it's functionally simpler, and that means in the finance world, it's been easier to bake into models and to kind of make sense out of, and ultimately, that simplicity has been a really good thing. Now, the concept of an energy community, just when you hear that word energy community, it has certain connotations. And I want you to, when you hear that again with respect to bonus adders, really understand this energy community we're talking about is coal, oil, and gas. So these are legacy fossil fuel. When you hear energy community, you should think fossil fuel energy community anytime that kind of comes up in your conversations. So how did this happen? How did we get into bonus adders, in legacy fossil fuel category? And to wrap your head around that, you got to take a step back way in the past, a year ago, when the bill got passed. And Build Back Better, if you followed the evolution of that bill, did not pass. And we went into this period where the Inflation Reduction Act was made possible because of the reconciliation process. And ultimately, you needed 50 votes. And to get 50 votes, because the tiebreaker, of course, would be the vice president, and to have a majority, you needed everybody to participate. And there was one holdout, a senator by the name of Joe Manchin. So Joe Manchin is, he's a Democrat, but he's from West Virginia. His family made his, their legacy is in the coal business. He's in a coal state. And so he was, reluctant to allow this bill to pass without certain concessions. There's a lot of things going on behind the scenes. But basically, my understanding is you can thank Joe Manchin for the energy community bonus adder. And the intent here was to support legacy fossil fuel communities. And although there were some that kind of, that caused them some pause, like, why are we supporting legacy fossil fuels? You really have to take a step back and go, well, this is about people. This is about communities that have been harmed, ravaged, just really economically in despair. And as we do the transition, we always talk about these bridge fuels and things like that. People are talking about the environmental components of a bridge fuel, but think about the people components of a bridge. There are communities that are being left behind, and to bring them along in the conversation with clean energy, providing financial incentives is a remarkably helpful way for energy communities to make that transition. So if you're in West Virginia, in Manchin's state, you may not have a very positive view about clean energy. And part of that might be because it could be threatening to livelihoods, and we have to understand and kind of be respectful of that. So from a policy perspective, I think it's great that there is, energy communities are part of this conversation. And so today's, conversation should be framed in that light of, like, how are we supporting these communities that are transitioning from legacy fuels to clean energy and renewables. So that's kind of a basic starting point for how this came about, and kind of hopefully will make sense when you hear about what is eligible and what is not. But we're here, was October 19th, Nicole? And
It is.
checking in here. And as we know, information becomes rapidly outdated. So if you're watching a web archive, be aware that this is where we're at in the cycle. Treasury, there was a bill that was passed last year. There's interpretation that's provided by the Treasury Department. Treasury provides guidance. And then there's preliminary regulations, and then proposed regulations, and then final regulations. And we're just at the early stages of this one. Back in April, the Treasury produced guidance, and then there was initial guidance provided in June 15th once some of the economic data was published. But we don't even have proposed regulations yet, let alone final regulations. So this is certainly a work in process. You can use this guidance to develop your projects, but just be aware things can change. So if you're watching this, in the future, you may want to check in and see what the latest is. But this guidance is super super straightforward. I mean, 18 pages. It is, casual read, and not super dense like some of the other guidance has been and some of the other regulations have been. So I'd encourage you to read through these. There's also some appendices, which I didn't list here, but they actually will list out specific, MSAs and other things. We'll talk about those in a second, but very approachable. Like, so take a peruse for your bedtime reading, those late nights when you can't fall asleep. But when you do kind of dive in, what you'll see is that there are 3 categories of eligibility. You can be eligible by virtue of being on a brownfield. There's a method for a statistical area. And when you hear statistical area, just think fossil fuel employment, jobs. And 3 is a coal closure. And we're going to dive into each of these. So buckle up. Here's how it starts. Number 1, brownfield category. So if you're operating on a brownfield site, you probably already know it. It is a contaminated site that has certain designations. The guidance will specify. You can go into detail about these definitions and how exactly to qualify. The only thing I want to raise awareness is that the word brownfield can be a little bit confusing. It is not the EPA definition of brownfield. It's the IRS's energy community definition of brownfield. So make sure that you're translating these things. In particular, just want to call out the petroleum contamination. So if you're on a site of a former gas station like that, they're not calling that a brownfield in this definition. And other definitions that would be a brownfield. But I think you get the idea. You have arsenic, lead, you're on a contaminated site. There's, remediation that has to be done. They're basically saying, look, if you're in a brownfield, you get a 10% bonus adder. And you can dive into, again, the details and the guidance. You can do certain environmental reports. Brownfield is a little bit unique because there isn't like one single map you can go to. EPA has a site and there are some of them there, but that's not all inclusive. There's no like universal brownfield under this definition map that's available. If you're operating on brownfield, you probably know it, or you're probably looking at developing a project that's known to have these hazardous substances, and you can use the guidance to identify what exactly reports you will need, environmental assessments, in order to have that eligibility. Okay, number 2. This is the kind of curious one that has some dynamic components to it. Let's put it that way. Statistical area, like I said, when you hear that term, you think fossil fuel employment. And so the definition here is that it's a location in an MSA or non-MSA, which we'll talk about, and you go through a 2-step process. Number 1, from 2010 and on, did it have either one of 2 conditions? Either a lot of people employed in fossil fuel or a lot of the tax-based revenue coming from fossil fuel to the local municipality. So step 1 is, kind of A or B. And then once you check that box that you've, done one of those, then there's step 2 of having an unemployment rate at or above the national average. Whew, that's a lot of sort of and or kind of stuff you got to chunk through. So we gotta like slow down for a second, take a step, and kind of little bite-sized chunks here. The first thing you might be wondering is, what is an MSA, a metropolitan statistical area? Sounds complicated. It's actually not. It's just, if you're trying to define a certain location, we have states. States have a boundary around them. It's a really big geographical territory, individual states. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have cities. So you can have a city that has a city line, and it's a geographically bound area. An MSA is something that's kind of in the middle. You can think of it as a region. And this is the definition, for an MSA, which again is a little bit wonky, because you just have to think it's bigger than a city, it's smaller than a state. It's kind of a economic cluster of multiple cities that all kind of interact and have, these economic ties. It looks like this. And when you see this map, there's some white space in here. So that's a non-MSA. A non-MSA is a location that's not in an MSA. But what's tricky about a non-MSA is that an individual state can have one or more non-MSAs. So if you're in a really small state, there might be a couple MSAs and everything else is one big non-MSA. If you're in a big state, you can have a bunch of different MSAs, but there could be a couple of different non-MSAs. So going, back to our definition, everything is focused around an MSA or a non-MSA. So you have to take your address and figure out which MSA or non-MSA you're actually in. Another way to look at this, and this is just the largest MSAs, is look at those names on the left. Those sound kind of familiar. New York, Newark, Jersey City. Yeah, it's sort of this cluster. They're all in the same MSA. So Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington, that's the same MSA. Phoenix, Mesa, Chandler, those are all kind of the MSA. It's a little bigger than just a city, and it's smaller than a state. It's kind of a little micro pub or region that is categorized together for purposes of just statistics and kind of tracking these things. So, okay, so everyone's got what it is. It's an MSA or a non-MSA. You got to figure out which, where you are and which one of those you're in. Step number one is that at any time after 2010, after roughly 2010, you had 0.17 or more % fossil fuel employment. Okay. Let's take a step back for a moment and think about the purpose of these rules that we were talking about before. So, Nicole, do you like documentaries? Just curious.
I do. I'm a big fan of documentaries.
Is that a thing, like Netflix or?
Yeah, everywhere.
Yeah. You ever watch a documentary, like a historical documentary, and they have like a reenactment of a scene? Or I love those. I always wonder, like, there's no transcript, nobody was in the room, but we know something happened. Like I watched a documentary of the Hoover Dam, and there's, the engineers are talking to each other. Well, they made up the words of the script, but we know that the Hoover Dam got built, so you can make some reasonable guesses about what the heck were they thinking? Like, what were they talking about?
Right.
So sometimes they take a step back and, we look at these and go, what were they thinking? And so it should make sense that if you're trying to help energy communities and legacy fossil fuel communities that were displaced, how do you identify those? And so probably someone raised their hand and went, well, it's where there's a lot of jobs where people are working in fossil fuels. That makes sense. Okay, so what if you're in a place where there's only one person in jobs, but there's a lot of tax-based revenue because they have some oil leases or other things, and you won't have a lot of people employed there, but a big part of the community infrastructure is funded with tax bases that that comes. So someone went, oh well, okay, well there's if there's not a lot of people there, a lot of the revenue from taxes comes from fossil fuel activities. That makes sense. So one or the other of those has to be kind of checked off. And then maybe someone else raised their hand and said, well, okay, but what if it's like an area, region, an MSA, and they've recovered, they've found a new industry, and they're really thriving. They don't really need that help, one might argue. And so maybe someone else raised their hand and say, okay, well, it's only if they have a lot of unemployment. If there's really low unemployment there, then the fact that they have a lot of people working in fossil fuel, legacy fossil fuel, maybe unnecessary there. Like I'm not making any value judgments on whether it's right or wrong, but you can imagine like that's what somebody was thinking. So they made rules about, having an unemployment rate at or above the national average. So now you have to break each of these down and go, okay, 0.17, what does it mean to work in fossil fuel? And they define it as extraction, processing, transportation, or storage of coal, oil, or natural gas. So then somebody went out to the NAICS codes and said, okay, well, certain companies, which all have an NAICS code, fit under that description. And we have all this data because, Bureau of Labor Statistics will publish how many employees work in certain companies who have NAICS codes. And you can actually determine like how many people work in coal mining in a particular geographic region, like an MSA. So these are the exact NAICS codes that they publish, these are in the guidance, and you can see how they're coming to this sort of place where a lot of people who work in legacy fossil fuels, could be affected and displaced. How do they come up with 0.17? No idea. I guess we have to wait for the actual documentary to come out, Nicole, to find out. There's an FAQ that Treasury published, and one of the questions was, how did you come up with 0.17? And the answer was, because the bill text said 0.17. So if you know the answer to that trivia question, send me an email,
Right.
because I don't know why it's 0.17 instead of 0.21 or whatever that number is. But that's the number. And then the second one is this idea of, regardless of how many employees that you have working in those particular sectors and NAICS codes, how much of the community's tax revenue base is coming from these activities? And the guidance punted on this. I don't know, Nicole, is there an emoticon for someone going like, I
There
don't know?
certainly is.
Yeah, so if you look in the guidance, there's this emoticon that says, I don't know.
Right.
We actually we don't know of any way to actually like figure this out. Seems like a great idea, when it's written into a law, and then when you hand it to Treasury to implement it, Treasury said, we love everybody's feedback and input, because we can't find like a central source or repository of information where all this data is collected, unlike fossil fuel employment with Bureau of Labor Statistics and all this other information that's already being gathered for other government purposes. There was a ready source available. For the 25% or more, they couldn't find one. So if you have ideas on this, I think comments and feedback to Treasury are certainly welcome. And then the last one is this concept of an unemployment rate at or above the national average. That's another one that it sounds logical, like it kind of makes sense. Yeah, we want that to really help people who are in a community that's experiencing a lot of unemployment. But the implementation of this one was a little bit tricky, because you have to ask the question, like, how do you determine the unemployment rate? So it turns out BLS produces a report, but it doesn't come out till usually April for unemployment data for MSAs for the year before. So in April 2023, we're supposed to have published the 2022 data. And they didn't publish it in April. They pushed it till May. We thought we were going to get updated. It ended up coming out in June. Like, it was a really fluid situation. And this is going to happen every year, because in 2024, sometime in April, May, or June, we're going to find out about what happened in 2023. And so this definition of having, we got to be in an MSA or non-MSA that has an unemployment rate at or above the national average, well, you're going to have to know what's the unemployment rate in the MSA, what's the unemployment rate in the national average, and you're going to have to then make a determination if you're eligible or not. So this is going to get tricky every year. For this particular year, we do have the information that was released in June related to 2022. And that allows you to make the determination if you've met this eligibility threshold. But it's temporary. It's only good, according to the guidance, until the next report comes out. Economies and communities are constantly fluid, fluid state. And so a community that has a lot of unemployment today and might qualify today, it may be different when the next set of data comes out. So you have to be aware of these timing differences and careful about relying on something and the timing of your project, because it may or may not be there. I'm hopeful some of this gets clarified in the proposed regulations when they come out eventually, but it's just, it's a little tricky, I guess, and you gotta have some awareness about how this is calculated and the timing of all of these factors. So recapping all of this, it's an MSA or non-MSA that since 2010 has had either a lot of folks working, in fossil fuel, or this other 25% threshold. One of those two has to be met, and an unemployment rate at or above the national average. So it's a lot of sort of chunking through, but thankfully we have a map, which we'll get to in a little bit. The last one is coal closure. This is pretty straightforward. So if you're in a community that has a coal mine that closed after 2000, or you're in a in an area that has a electricity generating plant, and that plant burns coal that shut down after 2010, then you can be eligible with this coal closure category. This one is measured a little bit differently because you'll notice it's not MSA. This is census tract or directly adjoining census tract. So if you think about all the different census areas in the US, if just one of them had a coal mine that closed, or coal burning power plant that closed, they can have a lot of adjacent census tracts. In fact, the guidance even says if they meet at a point, like think about the four corners, of a, on the map, like technically all those are considered adjoining. So there are some places that are kind of far away, but still technically would be eligible. So even, I guess my point is, like, even if you're like, no, there's no like coal plants that shut down near me, you might be surprised, particularly as you get into some of the non-MSAs. And so to recap, everything about energy community or fossil fuel energy community bonus adders is based on location. And there's three ways to qualify. You can either be in a brownfield, you can be in a statistical area, that's the MSA or non-MSA, or the coal closure. Those are the kind of the three ways to go about it. And here's your map. So you'll notice here something really interesting kind of jumps out at you. First of all, there's a handful of things that jump out at you. One, brownfields aren't on here, so that's going to have to be researched separately. Two is that the statistical areas are these blue areas. That's the MSAs or non-MSAs that are eligible. They have the 0.17%, and they have unemployment that's greater than the national average. These orange areas are, the category number 3, the coal closures. So the intention here originally, when you think about Joe Manchin in West Virginia, we all thought like Appalachia is going to get have incredible opportunities for eligibility, because you normally associate coal plants and coal mines with this region. But look at how much of the country actually became eligible. Enormous parts of the country are able to claim eligibility, not just from category 3, but category 2. So, and next year, all these blue area, these purple-ish areas will potentially look different. And there's a lot of places where you might not think you're going to be eligible, but I'd really encourage you to check. So a couple of weeks ago, I took my kids up to the Getty Center. Nicole, have you been there before?
I have not.
No? Oh man, it is amazing. It's this Getty Trust Philanthropies. They've spent $1 billion and made this amazing, and this is in, I think it was around year 2000 or so. This amazing, beautiful architectural masterpiece, and not a low income neighborhood. Let's put it that way. And technically, if they ever, put solar panels on there, it would qualify here, this enormous swath in Los Angeles. I wouldn't have guessed that. That was probably not what Joe Manchin was originally thinking. And there's enormous parts, by the way, like all of Alaska is covered as well. There's enormous portions where, just because of the way that logic tree worked out, some of these are non-MSAs that are enormous, and some of them are MSAs that just squeaked by that 0.17%, and they happen to have unemployment below the national average. This is enormous amounts of territory that I don't think anyone expected. And it's not subject to an allocation. It's not subject to a complicated calculation. You go to a map and you plug in an address. So from that perspective, that's why I say this has really been the sleeping giant, because you can rely upon this a lot easier than you can some of the other bonus adders, at least where we're at today, kind of the current state of all of the guidance and regulations that's been published. And it covers a whole lot more of the country than I think anybody sort of originally anticipated. So with that, since it is October 19th, we really should mention, if you're listening on the call today or watching this archive pretty soon after, today, it's October 19th. The doors are open for the Low Income Communities Bonus Adder portal. It is officially open. If you are not familiar with the Low Income Communities Bonus Adder, please watch our webinar on that bonus adder. And maybe Danielle, you could drop that in the chat for us. One salient point among many with this bonus adder is that they are going to treat all the applications received in the first 30 days as if they all were received together on the first day. So even if you weren't up at 6 a.m., like some of us, ready to open, check it out. And it's actually pretty decent. I called the help desk just for fun. They said, yeah, we're not getting a lot of calls. I don't know if that's because people are figuring it out or because nobody knows about it, but today is the big day. So we highly encourage you to get your applications in the first 30 days, because you're going to have the highest chance of being selected for an allocation. There are limited numbers of allocations depending on the category that you're in. And this is a slide straight out of our other webinar. So this might be a refresh for some folks, but if it doesn't look familiar, please do take a moment to familiarize yourself with the Low Income Community Bonus Adder and check out our webinar, which goes on for an hour, all about the intricacies and details of this particular bonus adder. So with that, gosh, Nicole, I feel like this was an easier one than some of our past journeys together
Yes, I have
the
to
bonus
agree,
adder
Lee.
tour. But what remains the same is CollectiveSun is here to support you and your clean energy projects to navigate through bonus adders and financing and construction and all of those fun things. So if you're scratching your head going, okay, how do I make sense of all this stuff? I give you Nicole, who is
Thank you,
a
Lee Barkin.
amazing guide to help you
that.
navigate through that journey. So Nicole, take it away.
Awesome. So, one of my favorite parts of this conversation is getting to talk about solutions. So, I do want to just mention that through our Sun for All Solar Fund, CollectiveSun offers solar loans and solar leases to nonprofits nationwide. Some of our recent Sun for All projects include San Diego State University, United Way, and Habitat for Humanity. And with that, I guess let's unpack the Sun for All Solar Loan. And the Sun for All Solar Loan was designed for nonprofits by nonprofit professionals with interest rates that are based on community impact or the valuable work and services that nonprofits provide in their community and not their credit score. The loan features payment holiday during construction, and that just means no payments while the system's being built, no prepayment penalties, no collateral beyond the solar equipment itself, We designed the loan for organizations that intend to take advantage of direct pay. And by its very design, the Sun for All Solar Loan is direct pay ready. So what does that mean? It means that we provide 100% of the installation costs. You've got a significant direct pay tax rebate that's coming at a future date, but your installer is not very likely to accept an IOU for work that they perform to install the system. So while you wait for the rebate to arrive, you're going to need 100% of the installation costs. So the Sun for All Solar Loan achieves that. We provide gap or short-term financing for the anticipated rebate amount, long-term financing for the remaining installation costs, and we roll that all into one simple loan with a set payment. When you do receive your direct pay tax rebate, you remit that to us to pay down the loan. The term length on the Sun for All Solar Loan is up to 10 years, and currently interest rates start at 4.99%. So when your organization, chooses the Sun for All Solar Loan, you're going to own the solar equipment, be responsible for negotiating your contract with your solar installer, provide your own project management, and be responsible for timely filing all associated direct pay tax filings. Lee, any pearls of wisdom on the loan before I move on to the lease?
No, this is perfect.
All right. The lease. So we refer to the Sun for All Solar lease as the easy button solution. And we do that for a reason. CollectiveSun does the heavy lifting to secure affordable financing and make sure the project is built properly. We don't get paid until the project is built and generating savings for the nonprofit. When you choose the Sun for All Solar lease, we're going to select and vet a qualified solar installer, handle the solar installer contract negotiations and management. We take care of construction management, including the review and verification of contractor milestones. We secure lien waiver and releases to protect the nonprofit customer against construction liens. We manage construction payments to contractors, subcontractors, and material suppliers. There are no lease payments due from the nonprofit until the system is fully installed and generating savings. No application fees, setup fees, or fees of any kind. No hassles for the nonprofit dealing with tax credits or understanding direct pay tax filings, or any IRS filings. The lease has a 20-year term with a simple monthly lease payment and a 1.9% escalator annually. Early buyout options are available if that's of interest to you, and that would be at the end of years 6, 10, and 15. Full operations and maintenance are included with the Sun for All Solar lease. Now that you've heard kind of the features and the benefits of the loan and the lease options, how do you make sense of it all? How do you decide which option is the best for your nonprofit? We recommend that you start with some practical questions, to which there are no right or wrong answers, by the way. This decision is going to be more about what resonates with the internal culture and resources of your organization. So just ask yourself these 3 things. Do you have in-house construction management expertise? We often see that larger nonprofits do, but many other nonprofits are functioning with volunteer staff that's already bandwidth constrained, and they don't have construction management expertise, let alone the time to manage the project installation. The second question, are you comfortable bearing construction risk? Solar installations, they are construction projects and things can go wrong. So is your nonprofit prepared to navigate that and bear that risk? And then the third question, are you comfortable bearing long-term ownership risks? If you purchase the solar system directly, your organization is the one that's responsible for long-term costs associated with owning and operating a solar system. When you lease the system, CollectiveSun bears the risk of ownership and is responsible for operations and maintenance costs. It's worth mentioning that there are, of course, additional considerations when you're comparing a direct purchase with a lease option. It's not an apples to apples comparison. It might be more akin to, do we buy a lawnmower and mow the lawn ourselves, like kind of DIY approach? Or do we hire a landscaper and let an expert do the work, the more of an easy button solution? No one's going to know better than you which solution is going to be the right fit for your organization. Nonprofit solar financing is not a one-size-fits-all conversation. So no singular solution is going to be a fit for every nonprofit. Because of that, we're super excited to be able to offer nonprofits a variety of solutions. And Lee, before we open it up for Q&A, did you want to add anything on the lease?
I think, again, for both of these, it's just part of a conversation, and I'd encourage you to reach out and have a conversation with Nicole and any fine people on our team, and just explore it. it's going to be different for every nonprofit, and there's a variety of factors, and there's no right or wrong answer, except, not going solar because it's too confusing. We can help undo
Exactly.
that. That's the only wrong choice is to not go solar. But we can help you through that process and figuring that out.
Well said. And on that note, I'm going to jump right into the Q&A. Does a landfill count as brownfield for IRS?
So if it meets that definition of landfill, brownfield, then yes. And certainly if there's contamination, and there are typically EPA designations, and I would just go back to that slide with the brownfield definition. But generally speaking, yeah, landfills are filled with contaminated materials, but just make sure that whatever kind of landfill, like the site that you're specifically looking at, go back to that definition that was on the slide, write that down, and then go back to the owner of that property and go, do you meet this particular definition? Because you want to make sure you're meeting the energy community definition, not necessarily the EPA definition. There's a great amount of overlap, but there's a couple differences. So just verify for the specific landfill that it meets the specific definition.
There was kind of an add-on to that question as well, differentiating between household waste or industrial waste landfill. Is that too deep in the weeds?
Yeah, I mean, I would, because it would have the same answer as well.
Yeah.
Like if it meets this definition, the brownfield definition is not specifically delineated for the type of property that is contaminated. So the rules may be different depending on what kind of property it is, but I would just go back to the sort of well-worn definitions that are quoted in the guidance and which are listed on the slide in order to determine your eligibility.
Fantastic. Why aren't Superfund sites considered brownfields?
Yeah, I'm not sure. That was an interesting one. Maybe they have their own funding, and Superfund funds aren't, there could be a handful of reasons, and I would be purely speculating, but you just have to use the definitions that are provided.
Got it. When is the unemployment rate effective for qualifying?
When is the unemployment rate effective? Well, the way it works is that Treasury is going to publish they'll literally list out every MSA, and that's what the map is based on, in May or June each year, based on the BLS report that's put out April-ish, related to the prior year. So if you go to the map today, we're in October 2023, you're going to see data from 2022. You can rely upon that data to determine eligibility for a project that is either starting construction today or anytime before the next set of data comes out, or placed in service. So technically you have this kind of, safe harbor component where there are scenarios where you start a project and then 3 years later, it no longer would show up on the map as eligible. But because you have started construction when it was eligible, you qualify. And conversely, you could have a project that doesn't qualify, and when it gets placed in service, you should check the map again because you might be pleasantly surprised to have eligibility.
Right. Let's see. Where exactly does the credit come from? I'm not sure exactly what's intended there, but I'm going to throw that at you.
Well, it's a bonus adder. So remember, this is stacking on top of an existing 30% investment tax credit. So you might go from 30 to 40. You might stack it with other bonus adders, and it is a tax credit, like any other investment tax credit.
Here's one that kind of ties into the conversation we were having yesterday about this particular bonus adder. Do you know if a project qualifies based on current data, gets built in early 2024 before the next employment data is out, but then employment is that MSA goes to at or above the national average, will the project get disqualified?
Yeah, so this is the trickiness of the timing that I was mentioning a little earlier. And like this guidance is pretty limited. I mean, it's only 18 pages. They covered the basics. I would expect there's going to be more details that are eventually provided by Treasury in the proposed regulations. But what we have today basically says that the set of data that is provided is good until the next set of data is provided. So for this particular person, yeah, you could run into these issues where you think you're going to get a 40% ITC, and let's say it's middle of April, and then the new data comes out, and if you start your construction in September, you might not be eligible. So you really have to pay attention to those timing factors, particularly with respect to the data, and the release of the data and how it updates the map.
Got it. So
As if you didn't have enough stuff to track in your life. Now you got one more.
Does the brown field need to be cleaned, remediated before installing solar?
I mean, that's more of an engineering question that I'd say is as opposed to like a tax question. So I would defer to your EPC to kind of, make that decision. But the rules about what you can or cannot build on from a permitting perspective are going to depend on an AHJ. For example, like you can't have residential property getting permitted on a contaminated site with lead and arsenic. Like they're not going to allow that to be built. Now, whether or not they allow a solar project to be built, I don't know. And that's going to be AHJ specific and more of an engineering type question. But a great idea, by the way, to build solar on top of places that are otherwise uninhabitable or unused in some capacity or underutilized in some capacity. These are great questions. Build as much solar as you can on landfills, build as much solar as you can on places that are otherwise unavailable for other uses.
Okay, so we do have a request to explain, since we have some time left, the remaining questions are kind of going back to the low-income community adder. But there is an opportunity to, at the request of Ed here, to explain the notion of an investment tax credit for a nonprofit.
Yeah, so this is another webinar, which Danielle, you might want to drop into the chat on direct pay, which is another fantastically exciting feature of the Inflation Reduction Act that creates what is functionally a elective payment or refundable credit that nonprofits can take advantage of. So this conversation about bonus adders is salient to how big that credit is. Is it a 30% credit? Is it a 40% credit? How to monetize that credit is probably a different conversation about, if you're a nonprofit utilizing direct pay or engaging in a lease structure or others. And these are covered in a very detailed way on our direct pay webinar. But short answer is yes, nonprofits can monetize tax benefits now, and it comes with a whole host of its own challenges that you need to be aware of that you may or may not want to use direct pay, or if you do, there's a couple like gotchas you've got to be careful of. Please watch the direct pay webinar for those details.
All right. Do reclaimed coal strip mines qualify?
Reclaimed coal strip mines. So this was referenced. You have to go back into one of the appendices in the guidance. They will tell you what exactly is, because one of the issues when they were trying to build these maps is, how do we know where all these places are? There actually is a provision for like letting Treasury know if you think you qualify as a closed coal mine or not. So I'd reference the guidance, go back to the guidance if you're not on that map, but if you're like, well, I'm on this thing that I think should be on that map, like you can have that conversation with Treasury. But as far as reclaimed, I would check. The short answer is check the map. And the longer answer is, if you want to challenge that, you can go back through those channels with Treasury.
Excellent. I just want to mention really quickly that, and thank you, Danielle, for doing that. Danielle put the links to the low income communities bonus adder webinar. And that recap also includes a Q&A transcript. So lots of questions were asked after that webinar. So watch the webinar. There are lots of folks asking questions about the low income communities bonus adder. So please, if you haven't already caught that in the chat, there's a link to that webinar, as well as the direct pay webinar. So whichever one or ones you're interested in or want to catch up on, be sure to check those out, because your questions here will be answered by those webinars and the recaps that you'll find there. All right. And I think that about does it here for the Q&A, unless something new popped up that I just haven't seen.
Yeah, I'll just add, I went back and looked real quick at the coal closure category, and there is a little bit on the other definitions pertaining to coal category, and this is section 0.04.2. And this says coal mine classifies as a surface or underground mine that has ever, for any period of time since 2000, a mine status of abandoned and sealed by the U.S. Department of Labor's Mine Safety and Health Administration in the mine data retrieval system. So I would go back to that Mine Safety Health Administration's mine data retrieval system to identify if their particular project that you're looking at is evidence is included or not. And again, this references what I mentioned earlier, that taxpayers with evidence to correct irregular location information of coal mines are abandoned and sealed since 2000 may provide that evidence to MSHA, and then they'll correct it in the annual update. So there are provisions, and anytime that there's an opportunity to rely upon an existing framework, Treasury likes to do that, right? It's going to point to, there's already a Mine Safety Health Administration that tracks all the mines. They don't want to reinvent wheels. So in most cases, you will see something referencing an existing definition.
Great. I just want to take a moment to let everybody know that registrants for today's webinar will receive a follow-up email that will contain a recording of today's presentation along with the slide deck and the Q&A transcript. There were a couple of questions that weren't answered live. We will combine those, and I think maybe the questions that we got in advance of the webinar, if there's anything there that wasn't addressed, you'll find those answers in the Q&A transcript. As always, if you're a nonprofit exploring solar, we're here to help, and you can reach out to myself and Lee directly or through our contact us page at CollectiveSun.com. And Danielle, any last minute thoughts before we wrap up?
Absolutely. So I'm glad that you covered that. We're going to answer all the questions once we complete the webinar, and we'll send that out to you. I did post the low income communities portal that opened today, because today is, one of the greatest days, being October 19th, and also Nicole's birthday.
But I made it through.
I know. So happy birthday, Nicole. And if you like this webinar and want to learn more, We have a bunch of resources on our events page and our news section. So feel free to connect with us there. And if we could do anything to help you, that's what we're here for.
And be on the lookout because more webinars will be coming in the future. Thanks, everybody.